Okay, Eddie, welcome to the podcast. It's really good to connect.
Hey Alex, yeah, thanks for inviting me on.
No, it's going to be really interesting. I've been wanting to speak to you for quite a while. I mentioned off air, I've been following you on social media. Really enjoy your content and your perspective, which certainly for guests coming onto this podcast, I think is incredibly unique at this point in time. So before we kind of dive into today's conversation, are you happy just to sort of introduce yourself a little bit for anyone that might not be familiar with you yet?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, my name's Eddie. I'm a shamanic practitioner, um, which is, um, I suppose, the kind of Western version of a shaman. We don't have a lineage here, so a shaman would have been kind of initiated into a very old, ancient lineage with lots of kind of binding mythology and a lot of tradition, and we don't have that here for various reasons. We lost our very old traditions, so we're kind of planting the seeds for hopefully something that will grow into something strong in the generations to come. But I've been initiated into shamanic techniques um, because it's mostly a technique based healing practice. Um, it's this idea that you go into a trance, into an altered state, and in the altered state, um, you're able to converse with spirit. And the shamanic belief is that everything has a spirit. So not just you or me or animals and trees and things that generally a lot of people see as alive and conscious. But everything else, if you built a house, your house would now have a spirit. Your car has a spirit. So all of these things, the world is very much more alive. And shamanism really is the practice of being able to get into an altered state where you can start communicating with these things, which seems very out there. I mean, it is very out there. I mean, our culture, it's completely mad. Being from this culture and being someone who kind of grew up going to the football and raving and all of that stuff, it took a long time to surrender to this kind of this idea, and I was led to it through quite a lot of mental health issues, quite severe anxiety and very severe OCD. And panic attacks and all of that stuff. So I kind of was at a stage in my life where I thought I'll try anything, which actually helped me because there was less resistance, I suppose, because I tried everything else. So yeah, I got kind of introduced to the strange and wonderful world of shamanism and studied with a teacher. It'll be my 5th year now, and now I'm here, I suppose.
That's brilliant. I wasn't aware of kind of what got you into the shamanism. So it's really interesting to know that actually there is that kind of that health element ultimately, and then it's been beneficial from that perspective as well.
Yeah, I got into it for my own healing.
Mm.
That was the reason. That's what it drew to me, and that's quite an archetypal journey for someone who becomes a healer. At least in shamanism, there's this thing called the Shamanic Sickness, which is cross-cultural, and often the shaman will spend a lot of time mad, basically. And that's definitely what happened to me, and for me personally it was shamanism that allowed me to put myself back together, and kind of cure myself in a sense. So it was very helpful for me, and but it sort of came with a deal. It was like, okay, if this is going to work for you, then you're going to have to dedicate your life to this, and help other people. It wasn't this kind of thing that healed me and then I was able to just kind of go on about my life. My teacher says the spirits are like the mafia. Um, when they knock on your door, you kind of have to do their bidding, and it kind of has been like that, but in a loving and very nourishing way. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the journey in a little bit of a nutshell.
Mm. So with that sort of journey, did you go and see a shaman initially, or did you kind of sort of look into it and then actually start your own training?
Yeah, I did. Well, I was into yoga, and I'd trained as a yoga teacher. And about halfway through my training, I decided I didn't actually want to be a yoga teacher. Um, I love yoga, but it just wasn't really my medicine. And then I did a Reiki 1 and 2, which is kind of the level you get to where you can start working on other people. And um, yeah, I mean, all of these things were very helpful for me, but they weren't doing anything for my mental health, which was pretty severe. Um, I was in talk therapy as well, and also had gone kind of the other side, which was to kind of party away my symptoms, and lots of recreational drugs. And yeah, just I decided that none of this was really working. And then someone gave me a book on shamanism, and I read it, and it was wilder than the other spiritual practices, which fit with me better personally.
Mm.
Lots of drumming around fires and mud and spending time in the forest. And this idea of, instead of we need to grow up to heal, actually, you can grow down. You can root into the earth, and really get to know your own humanity, which that really appealed to me more than this kind of idea that spirituality equaled purification. Um, and I was like, wow, this is really interesting. It's sort of like heavy metal spirituality. Uh, and so I was like, oh, I'll go see a shaman. And I went to see a shaman, and it was the complete opposite of everything I'd read in the books. It was all this kind of very light and pure, and nothing, it was very underwhelming. Nothing happened at all. And that kind of went on for about 6 months to a year, where I'd go on Google and be like, shaman in London, and I'd go and see these shamans, and nothing would happen. But I got obsessed by the ideologies and the myths and the beliefs and indigenous culture. So I just was literally obsessed. I'm quite an obsessional person, and this was like my new thing. So I read all the books, like anything I can get my hands on. Um, and then I went to an ayahuasca ceremony, and it made me so much worse,
Huh.
really, really worse. And I was like, wow, okay, I'm just confused. Everything I've read about ayahuasca was like it's this miracle cure, and and it's amazing medicine, but for me it didn't work at that time. It kind of just blew me apart, and it took me a long time to find my teacher, who I eventually, about 2 years after I started getting into it, found. And then I went for a healing with him, and he was the only one, and it sounds simple now, but he was the only one that said, well, you're going to have to heal yourself. There's nothing I can do. I'll kind of clean you up energetically, and give you a different perspective, and then I'll open a door. And if you want to walk through that door, it's a tough journey, but I'm not going to do it for you. And it re-empowered me. And all the other healers I'd been to see were just taking my power. Oh yeah, leave it with me. This is what's wrong with you, and now I've healed it. Now, and that wasn't doing me any good, because every 2 months I'd feel bad again. I'd have a mental health crisis, and then I'd have to go and see another healer, which isn't sustainable.
Mm.
Whereas my teacher was very, very, very firm. He was just saying, this is what you need to do. You need to heal yourself. It's going to be a long, dark journey at times. And that worked. It was the beginning, and then I could go and heal myself, which is how someone takes their power back often, especially with mental health. It's they have to feel empowered enough to go on that journey. They can get as much help along the way as possible, but it's such a personal thing, mental health.
Mm.
Which is why I think mental health professionals say that there isn't really a cure for anxiety, which is true. There's not a blanket cure, but each person has a key, I believe, that they can unlock their mental health. And then once they start to do that, there seems to be this kind of symbolic mythic way they can work with their own mental health, which actually really empowers someone. So they can see it more as a call to adventure rather than this thing that there's something wrong with them. So yeah, it took me a long time to have a good experience of shamanism. Definitely. We're talking off air about the grounded aspect of it, and that was part of it, something that was applicable in my mundane life, which I was like, oh, I can actually use this now. Yeah.
No, it's beautiful. I think that message around your teacher empowering you and sort of say, you know, I can't heal you, but I can clean you of your energy and things like this. I think that's applicable to everyone's health journey ultimately. And we've said it before, sort of on Health Path webinars and things, which is one of the only criticisms I probably have of conventional medicine, is this idea that the power lies within the medical practitioner, doesn't it? It's kind of, you go to see them, you ask them what's wrong, they give them the pill, they say take the pill and you'll be fine. And it takes all power and all responsibility away from the person suffering with the symptom, no matter what it is. So I think that's such a important message for us all to sort of appreciate. But a question that comes to mind, Eddy, is you kind of say you went and had a healing session with the shaman who became your teacher. What does that mean? What does that look like? What would someone what would someone expect maybe if they came to see you, if there is an answer to that?
Well, that's when it starts getting a bit out there. I mean, the healing session, I mean, he's my teacher, so they look similar because he's kind of initiated us into his teachings as well. So the session's about 3 hours long. They start with a consultation, or a chat really, which is the way I see it, really to just get everything out on the table. When we're in it and we're like, well, I suffer with anxiety, for example, it's like, I'm anxious about this thing. We focus on that thing, and it's often quite difficult. And when we start pulling things out of the psyche, really, and saying, well, this is my habits, and this is my day-to-day, and this is who I've fallen in love with, and this is my relationship with my parents and everything. And when you put it out on the table, it's like, wow, actually all these things are connected in some way, and there's patterns here. And I think that helps. And in modern medicine, and especially with mental health, there's this kind of idea that it's like laser focus. If you focus on one thing, then you'll get to the bottom of it. Whereas actually, in my experience, it's like if you take the focus away and kind of depersonalize for a second and just get everything out, and kind of see your life as this arc of a story, kind of like your own myth, then you start to notice small things and uncover different things, and that's quite good, and gives someone a completely different perspective. And then the kind of shamanic aspect of it starts, which is someone will lay down and then I'll drum and go into a trance, drumming and singing, which is kind of the traditional shamanic way to go into a trance. Just like when shamans take ayahuasca, the plants send them into a trance, but you can do that with drumming, and most shamanic cultures use the drum or the rattle or singing. It's better on a Monday afternoon instead of having to take ayahuasca, definitely. And yeah, you drum and you invite spirit in. So that's the shamanic technique. You jump out of your body, and the spirits that you work with and have formed a relationship with throughout your training, you invite them in and they take over your body and they do the healing. And so the healing will look like kind of pulling things out of people, kind of spitting things into people, kind of like hands-on healing sometimes, similar to Reiki in how it looks, at least. Drumming and singing for that person, kind of singing their life back together. So it's sort of like being, you're just cleaning them up. It's kind of like an MOT. It's like, well, you know, they've got a blockage here and this here, and they need energy in here in their stomach, or they take it out here, or there's too much energy in their head, or whatever it is. But your idea is to kind of balance someone out. and bring their power back, their kind of personal power, their essence. And yeah, that's all very strange for someone, for our culture. And so there's another kind of half an hour after that, which is basically just doing some integration work, because that as an experience can be quite hard for people to put together. And often some of the things that spirit says or shows me, I'll say to someone, and that will confuse them even more. Because there seems to be this constant dance between people saying, well, is this real? And then the information which comes back, which kind of leads you to believe that it is real. So then, and then your kind of Western mind kicks in, and there can be some confusion. So that's why the sessions are so long, because it can take a while to kind of bring someone back. So they can be quite intense.
Yeah. And do you, as the shaman, when you talk about sort of interacting with spirits, is this something you develop an ability to see, or is it more of like a felt sense?
Both. Yeah, both, I suppose. You definitely seeing in sometimes a different way, not with your eyes, but very much the way you see, as if you when you daydream.
Okay.
Seeing in that sense.
Yeah.
But sometimes very physical as well, sometimes with your eyes.
Okay.
Can be different. In the healings, not so much with your eyes because it's quite quick, but in some of the ceremonies when we're drumming for 5, 6, 7 hours and you fasted and things, then things really start to happen. And it's it's a deeper trance.
Okay. And I mean, I mentioned off air that I would love to eventually do some of this training, and I would love to come and see you before then. So I'm kind of, it's a kind of a personal question, but also one that I'm sure many of our listeners will be interested in hearing your response to, which is, can people, and you've described it as a bit of an MOT, so can people come to you without necessarily like a specific issue or challenge? Can they come just because they want to sort of experience that healing?
Yes and no. I would say it's always better when the person is really seeking healing. There's this kind of traditional idea that when you want healing, you've kind of got to cry to the spirits for it. And with because of the nature of it, and you're calling on spirit to do the healing, essentially, as just an experiential thing. The one-to-one healing probably wouldn't be the best thing. Maybe a ceremony would be better, something like a sweat lodge where it's much more communal and you can actually be there on behalf of someone else as well. You could go there and pray for your family, you could pray for your community, you could pray for a friend and kind of give yourself over in that ceremony to them.
Okay.
For the one-to-one healing, because it's very intimate, I mean, you don't need to know exactly why you're coming, but if there's a sense that you want healing in some way, lots of people come to me and they're like, I'm anxious and I don't know why.
Okay.
And that's very common.
Yeah.
Or I've got a chronic health condition and I don't know what it is, something like that. But I've done that before. I did it with a journalist from the Metro, and she was like, "Yeah, I just basically want to experience it so I can write an article in you." And I was drumming, and this, it was like nothing was happening. Drumming and drumming, nothing happening. And the spirits were like, "We're not very interested in being in the paper, to be honest. It's not, we're not here for your ego."
Right.
Which was a lesson, definitely. They kind of come to work, and that's it.
Okay. And I guess, one of our topics today is around sort of mental health and sort of a shamanistic approach to it. And it was your video that you recently did on Instagram that kind of really, I guess, propelled me to reach out to you to get you onto the podcast. So I guess, do you want to sort of expand on that sort of concept? I mean, so much of it resonated, and I thought it was quite interesting that a lot of what you said, blends with and aligns with the sort of the scientific research when it comes to the importance of things like community and connection when we're talking about mental health. So there is this kind of really good overlap between I guess, the ancient wisdom and those sort of shamanistic principles and what we're learning in the lab, so to speak.
Yeah. What was the video about specifically? Just
I'm pretty sure it was just titled sort of a shamanistic approach to mental health.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, shamanism is very old, very, very old. Perhaps the oldest form of religion, definitely that we know of. So kind of anywhere between 10 to 15,000 years. And then for a long time, that was the way. I mean, shamanic cultures, they're all over the world. And they have different beliefs and different kind of ways of doing shamanism, I suppose. But the core of the same, of the community, of the going into a trance, and of offerings as well. So giving offerings to the natural world and to the spirits of the world in payment, really, of life. Lots of shamanic cultures believe we're born with this original debt because we're consumers. And obviously we've gone into overdrive with that in our culture, but even in the most balanced indigenous cultures, we eat food, we destroy habitat even on a small scale, and we kind of walk around quite clumsy, and we take. So we create little holes in the fabric of existence, and the offerings were traditionally a way to weave those back together so we could live in the most balanced way. And in our culture, a lot of the mental health issues from a shamanic perspective are because this debt is just so huge, because we've taken and taken and taken and taken without paying anything back, without really a regard for the natural world at all. We've also made our culture very individualistic, and we lack community. So when something happens in the world, it often feels like it's happening directly to us, and it's on our shoulders. People who struggle with anxiety and depression and OCD are often very sensitive. So that's exacerbated as well. And it can become crushing. And in traditional societies, they're not so individualistic. If they are individualistic, that comes secondary to the community, which forms this quite strong collective psyche. So when something happens, it doesn't just happen to you, it happens to your community. So that burden is shared. And that seems to be very important for a human. It seems to be very helpful, especially with mental health conditions. And these traditional societies, they're not utopia. It's not just about we need to go and live exactly like them. But they have very, very small, if any, cases of mental health. And if someone in the culture does have a mental health break, they're empowered for having it, and honored, and often listened to and lifted up onto a pedestal, and the whole community gets together, and there's no stigma or taboo around it. It's like, you're experiencing this on behalf of the community, so thank you so much. Whereas you look at our culture, and it's like, well, you can't even function in our community, so there's something wrong with you. And that, I think, is so crushing for someone. We're told there's something wrong, we've got all this diagnosis and all of this stuff, and pills that kind of negate any mental health experience, like it's something that just can't really talk about it. That makes everything a lot worse. So the shamanic perspective on mental health is that it's a teacher. It's a kind of call to initiation. And it can be looked at in a much more symbolic and mythic way, rather than this rational and logical kind of idea that you're just weak or your mind doesn't work or something like that, which is so damaging. And that follows someone around forever.
Yeah, it's like kind of that. It's a label, isn't it? And what I find really interesting with it is it's all very black and white in sort of the Western world. It's kind of like you're either mentally well or mentally unwell, and it's like who decides where that threshold is and when you actually get a diagnosis. It seems quite strange to me that we've set it up that way.
Yeah, it is. It's mad. And especially with something with the fluidity of the human mind. Um, it's, can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah, I was saying with the fluidity of the human mind, we experience different things all the time. And for someone to say, well, this is your diagnosis, and you're probably always going to have this, it's such a curse. And it's not meant in an evil way. It's just the way that modern medicine has to kind of function to find this kind of one cure fits all thing because our society's so big. But the truth is, you can have a point of time where you have any mental health condition possible, and then you could wake up the next morning and actually it's left. And it's that curse, that diagnosis that keeps it around, because you constantly second guess yourself and you're always searching. It's like, well, I was told I had a panic disorder, so what can I panic about? Or what should I panic about? And you kind of test yourself. And I had that with my anxiety. It's like, well, I'm an anxious person. I've been told by my therapist I'm a very anxious person. So any situation, I was looking at it from the eyes of an anxious person because that was my identity. And that made my healing much more difficult, as opposed to actually being like, oh, well, I'm anxious at this today. But there's actually 90% of things I'm not anxious about.
Yeah.
And it's very disempowering.
Yeah, I see that a lot. Even with things like digestive symptoms, and it's this idea sometimes I think, and I'll try and articulate this well. The idea that the healing journey can sometimes become all-encompassing, and I sometimes speak to clients around this idea that who are you when you do reach optimal wellness, if there is such a thing. And sometimes you can always kind of see the tumbleweed go past because everything is so immersed in them getting well that they've kind of lost their identity. They are a sick person trying to get well, and that's all that there is in their life. And it's obviously understandable when someone is suffering so much, but I always encourage them to reflect on that and think, who are you going to be when you are well, when you're feeling better? And can we start to bring some of these habits, routines, connections back into your life now as a way to change and evolve that identity? And I think you've said before this idea of, I'm not quite sure what you said from memory, but it was something like the idea of, healing requires sacrifice, I think maybe was something you said, or something along those lines, that it needs to be bigger than us, going back to this idea of shamanism and the importance of our community.
Yeah, I think with healing, it comes a point, because you'll always be able to do more healing, I think, or most of us will, physical and mental, which is probably the same thing at the end of the day, ultimately. So there comes a point where you have to say to yourself, I'm healed enough, I think. Otherwise, at least for a time being, you can't heal all the time. It can't just be something that you're just doing and doing and doing, because you're going to exhaust yourself. It takes a huge amount of effort and energy. So fair enough if people want to go back into it and be like, right, okay, I want to look at this issue for 6 months. But I think people should be quite firm with themselves and say, all right, now it's not about me. for the next 6 months. Now it's about service to whatever that is. Because otherwise, it's very difficult for a wound to heal if you keep touching it. Sometimes you need to just take a step back and say, it's not perfect, but it will do. And B, this constant focus and focus and focus, you miss so much. And when you're healing, you're not really living often. And you need that as well, because it's going back and starting to live when it's like, wow, then you can really take stock of how much healing you've done. But if you're always kind of looking at the wound, looking at the wound, looking at the wound, it's very difficult then. And it's hard to be in a place of gratitude when you're just looking at the wound all the time.
Yeah.
So, but it's a delicate balance. Really difficult. It can be very hard to pull yourself away from that.
Definitely, I think so. But there's so much wisdom in what you just said there, Eddie, I think, and it definitely resonates for my own journey. You know, I went from sort of 4 or 5 years old, I started to develop chronic digestive issues and had them throughout teenage years, through all my 20s. And there were times when I definitely kind of got stuck down the rabbit hole of trying to fix and heal it. And to the point of it being detrimental, absolutely. And I think it's taken me my 30s so far to really understand a lot of what you've just said, ultimately. And that is healing in its own right, ultimately.
Yeah. I mean, I often think about this with things like physical issues, especially, and especially something if you take an allergic reaction. So there's certain things that give you allergic reactions. You stay away from those things. And you kind of understand your limits. And I mean, in some cases, perhaps it's not like this, but in a lot of cases, you understand that it doesn't represent who you are as a person. It's just something that causes a reaction in you. And this strive for perfection with mental health, and this idea that we need to rid all of anxiety and everything out of our bodies before we can say that we're healed. If we can start to see it more as almost like an allergic reaction or just a bad back that flares up every now and then. It doesn't define us. It's just something that, yeah, sometimes I have to dial things down for a week or two, come back to myself because mentally I'm a little bit run down. And it doesn't need to define you as a person. I think that would be helpful. It's definitely been helpful for me. I still get very anxious. Sometimes my OCD really comes back. But I know that it will go again. So I don't feel the need to anymore to go into it and really analyze it and stuff, because it's just an experience more than a condition. And I just need to be a bit more gentle with myself at that time. Do a lot less things, less social media, stay away from what could cause flare-ups. And then it's usually about 3 days for me when I get very anxious or have these kind of OCD attacks. And after 3 days, whatever I was panicked about, it's still there, but there's not the same reaction to it. And that's really helped me.
Yeah. I can 100% relate to that from a digestive perspective. I think I've, in the past, definitely, when I've had flares, like you say, I know that it will pass ultimately. So you don't have to go down the rabbit hole of what have I eaten differently? What have I done? What is the cause? I have a colleague who talks about health being like the terrain of a field, basically. And you never quite know where you are in the field, but there's a ditch around the field, which is when you fall in the ditch, that's when you become symptomatic. And we just don't know, are we standing in the corner of the field where one night bad sleep might be enough to tip us over into the ditch? Or are we standing right in the center of the field where actually we've got really good resilience in our health and we've got this big buffer? And I think I really like this idea. We just don't really know where we are within that. Yes, we can track data and we can use some of the new technology to look at physiology, but that still isn't giving us a full picture of what's going on. And this idea of it will pass, and being, as you say, gentle with ourselves and just taking a step back in any area that we can. That's a really beautiful, I think, nourishing, tender, gentle way of approaching health and symptoms. And it's just holding things that little bit lighter, it sounds like. And I think a lot of my clients who have struggled for long periods of time, it feels to me like one of the themes within that is they're holding on to it very tightly. And they, they're overthinking, over analyzing, and really trying to control things as much as possible. And what it sounds like you're saying is, holding things more gently, and being kinder to ourselves in those periods when there's a flare is actually, it's going to allow us to get through it quicker, I would imagine.
Definitely. And it mirrors also what would happen in a traditional community where they'd look after you and accept whatever was going on, and maybe even get together and everyone would do a ceremony for you. I mean, imagine how amazing that would be. And so, but you can do that for yourself in a way. It might not be as kind of tangibly powerful and healing, but just to give yourself permission for having crazy thoughts, or to feel like, actually, I'm too scared to leave the house right now, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with you at all. It just is sometimes how it is. Doesn't really even need to be much meaning there. You don't need to explain it, or find out why. It just is how it is, and it will pass if you let it. Often we don't let these experiences wander away. We keep them because we need to find out why they came, to try and prevent them from ever coming again. And it doesn't need to be the case. And when I stopped trying to do that, it made it so much easier for me. It was very scary at first to have very anxious thoughts, especially with OCD when it's so based around compulsions. To say, right, I don't need to react. I don't need to prove anything. That's terrifying. But after 3 days of kind of sitting in that fire, all the energy dissipates and you realize, actually, wow, what an illusion it was. Which is very empowering, but it's a difficult process. If anyone's listening to this and it's like, well, it's easier said than done. I know it is. It's much easier said than done. And I've fallen many times and continue to do so. But it does work.
No, I 100% agree. And in my own way, have experienced it several times as well. And again, kind of what you're saying, I find that the more we try and push something away, the more it likes to cling on ultimately. And what you say there, kind of just letting it wander in its own time and kind of just sitting in it, even though that can be whatever word you want to use, distressing or challenging. I think once we've developed that ability to sit with it and contemplate what truly is going on and why our body is giving us this symptom, we can learn from it. And with that comes, I think, great wisdom when things start to come back again as well. Our ability to sit with it improves each time, ultimately, I think.
Definitely. And your relationship with that part of you that is anxious, because if you think about anxiety, it's a fear response. And the shamanic view of things is everything has a spirit, and that includes your thoughts as well. So your thoughts and your belief systems and the parts of you that react to certain things are alive, and they exist. And if you look at it that way, and there's a part of you that is just very anxious and constantly looking for things to be afraid of, I mean, ultimately, it's doing that because it thinks it needs to protect you. And in that way, it's an ally. It might be a bit overbearing sometimes and actually have its ideas around how to protect you a bit skewed, but ultimately it's out of love. And if you invite that in and form a relationship with it, make your life much easier, rather than kind of, imagine you were desperately trying to protect someone and all they did was tell you, actually, go away. I don't want to listen to you. You probably, you probably get angry at them in some way, and or at least get louder.
Yeah.
Louder and louder. And that's what it can be like with mental health. It's like, you need to be anxious about this. No, I don't. Yeah, you do. No, you don't. And then it builds up and it's so loud and loud, and then it can be completely overwhelming. So in everyone's own way, it can be helpful to form quite an intimate relationship with the parts of them that are anxious, depressed or something.
And do you have any kind of generic advice in regards to how we might be able to do that? This idea of forming a relationship with it. Is it just kind of trying to slow down, quieten the mind and connect with it rather than distracting ourselves? I think, this idea of using our phones and social media and anything else for that matter to kind of distract and keep ourselves busy, is that sort of one of the ways that we try and cut ourselves off from the actual experience that we need to connect with, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we all distract ourselves at some points. In terms of generic advice, it's difficult, but because it is so personal. But if you think of it as a part of you that needs love from you, and needs to be listened to, you need to hear it out at least. But it doesn't need to be told that it's wrong. It just needs to be heard. So it's an uncomfortable process. But if you can sit in that kind of, it sometimes feels like you're sitting in fire, without reacting, without needing to leave it, without needing to react in a certain way to try and find things to put out the fire or distract yourself, the energy will dissipate. It won't last forever. And when it does, then you can see a bit more clear. And be patient with yourself. And don't let it, you don't need to identify with it. It doesn't become your identity. See it as more of an experience rather than this condition that's, oh, it's back again. It's just at the moment you're experiencing anxiety or OCD or depression.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds very, I guess, familiar and similar to kind of just like mindfulness, sort of mindful awareness of what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, all spiritual practices that work, it's this idea of let your thoughts come and let them go. Don't attach to it. And it's that idea. So whether it's meditation or yoga or breath work or shamanism, if you can depersonalize a little bit and let them come and and let them go, that's the important thing. Because they're going to come whether you like it or not. But let them go. You don't need to figure it out. You don't have anything to prove. But then also seeing your symptoms as something symbolic and not necessarily literal. Your anxiety could be telling you something, but it might not be telling you what it's literally telling you. It'd be sometimes when you have a dream, they can be quite symbolic. You don't need to take the dream literally, but there's a meaning under that. which can be quite powerful. I found things like anxiety and depression, it's similar. It's like to try and get to the root of what it's actually telling you. Um, there seems to be a deeper wisdom involved, and that will come.
Mm.
Um, but it often comes when you're not so focused on the literal and the rational aspect of it.
Yeah. Yeah, you talk about sort of things like myth and the archetypes a bit, which I guess relates to this.
Yeah, myth especially. The archetypes similar as well. They can get, you can make someone very paranoid. It's like, well, what archetype is this, and what, and I mean, they're very useful, but with myth and story, definitely it allows you to, and literally talking about myths, you know, famous myths, Greek myths, or old European myths, or, you know, North American myths, things like that. Um, I see them more as kind of this kind of ancient technology of the psyche, where you're able to confront very scary things within yourself through the story, so it can be less confronting. um, you can put yourself in it in different, quite hard to articulate, um, but you can use myth to kind of view your life from without actually using your life experiences,
Mm.
which we have so much emotional charge with that it can be difficult to look at them in a helpful way.
Yeah.
With myth, it allows us to be like, oh, this, I can see where I fit into this, and I can see the lessons in the symbology, and oh, you know, or a very kind of standard one would be this idea of the hero's journey. And it's like the hero has to go through all this adversity and then slay this monster, and we've all got the monster in our life. And then it's the ability to be able to look that monster in the eye. And actually, to become the hero, you actually need to have gone through all this pain. So all that pain that you've been through becomes empowering rather than disempowering. Nobody's born the hero. And then there's this return to normal life afterwards. So that is kind of a myth. Is it can be, you can frame your life in a way that's helpful, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, makes complete sense. Would I be right in saying there's a kind of maybe sometimes almost a metaphorical kind of element to it? You know, metaphor can be very powerful and healing. And I guess mythology is kind of partly that ultimately.
Yeah, totally, totally. And shamanism is very symbolic. Often, if I'm doing a dreaming with someone, like if I'm going into trance and asking spirit what they need to do, something will come back like, well, I saw you in a garden with yellow flowers, and uh, it'll turn out that the person there'll be a very specific memory with yellow flowers, and it will be that they need to look at that memory and they need to give the pain associated with that memory some honoring, kind of tend to it, perhaps like the garden. So it'll come through in a very symbolic way, rather than kind of matter of fact, this happened when you were this old with this person and you need to look at that. um, which can make it less confronting. Like I said, it kind of adds an aspect to it which you can see the beauty in a situation which actually might have been quite traumatic,
Mm.
which again gives that person's power back.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so I guess you've used the word. I think it was when we were recording integration and sort of the importance of integrating the experiences of shamanic healing, whether I guess one to one or in ceremony. Is that something that kind of you offer as well, so people can see you for one to one work? I know that you do ceremonies. I've seen kind of you advertise those as well. And obviously integration is such a key part of trying to, I guess, take the lessons from the experience that's had. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my door's always open to anyone I've worked with at any point, because it can be like that. And often after the healing, people will have quite chaotic dreams, which can there can be meaning in those, and sometimes not. Sometimes they're just chaotic dreams. Um, but the integration is very difficult because so much happens, whether it's a ceremony or a healing. It can be working kind of on you for years afterwards, and something that you'd be told in a healing and it'd be like, oh, that's interesting, and then 2 years later it would be like, oh, now I understand. So it takes a very long time sometimes, and especially with ceremony, especially with medicine ceremonies, so ayahuasca or any kind of plant medicine, peyote, anything, that you have these or can have these amazing visions where you're all over the universe and you're this and that, and then the ceremony ends and you're back on the tube, or you're back in your family house and they're arguing or whatever it is, you're back to your mundane life, and it's like, how do you marry those two things together?
Yeah.
And that's the importance of it, because that's what it's for. It's to then exist in that mundane life in a more harmonious way. And something that can happen with shamanic ceremonies, people get addicted to it because it can be so amazing and so you can feel so connected to things, but then that inevitably wears off because it's part of real life, but it's not the bulk of real life. This world that we live in, this kind of boring, sometimes boring, mundane stuff with taxes and bills and petty squabbles, that's life. It's always been life to some certain degree, the kind of mundane stuff. And that's what ceremony is for. It's to make that more balanced and harmonious. And you can get addicted to that liminal space in ceremony, which isn't particularly healing, because you need to be able to function in the everyday world.
Yeah.
So the integration is very important because it allows a bridge between that kind of ecstatic experience and every day.
Yeah. And like you say, I certainly know with sort of psychedelic ceremonies, there can be so much symbolism in what comes up, that having someone experienced, knowledgeable, trained in helping you understand what that means can be so important. And I certainly know that, that first psychedelic experience I had, I was still kind of breaking it down and understanding it, definitely 9-11 months afterwards. Like something would happen, I'd go, oh, okay, that's what that weird octopus meant.
Yeah, definitely. It happens all the time. Happens all the time because we don't have this concept of visions really in our culture. They're quite an alien thing, and often they can come through and we take them for face value, and again we lose the deeper meaning sometimes. There's a guy called Michael Harner who kind of created this thing called core shamanism, and he basically went around the world and then packaged shamanism for the Western mind. And in his book, he talks about this ayahuasca ceremony he had in the jungle, and it was these kind of crocodile spirits that were, really powerful, and they were telling him that the world is going to end, and this was the message he had to give the world, and if he didn't do it, the world would end. So he's obviously very panicked after this. And he tells his shaman that did the ceremony with him about this vision. And they said, right, you need to go to the master shaman. And he's 3 days down the river. And so he finally gets to the master shaman and he waits and he tells him this vision. And he's like, oh, they're always saying that. Don't worry about that. and it's like, it happens to the Western mind. It's like, and the chosen one or something, or and it's not always like that. But there could be a deeper meaning involved that's very personal, which is what you need to access.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's a fascinating area. I think, I'm mindful of your time, Eddy. I don't want to take up too much, but I'm wondering whether because I imagine for some of our listeners, you know, this is sort of a pretty new topic, an area that they don't have much context or awareness of. So is there anything that we haven't yet mentioned that you think is kind of important for people to be aware of if they're now kind of intrigued in shamanism, and they might give you a little Google or see if someone's local to them? Is there anything that you feel we should sort of let them be aware of, I guess?
Yeah, I think I'd encourage people to, if you want a little bit of homework, is to go out and give an offering, which is a shamanic practice. It's kind of a little ritual and ceremony in itself. So the idea behind it is you give something of tangible value, so a coin or some fruit or food or something, or go out and, you know, if you're that way inclined, to sing a song or create a piece of art or something, and pick somewhere that calls to you in nature. You know, maybe you think of a place already, it's quite prominent, maybe a tree or a river or a hilltop or something. Go to that place and introduce yourself. Say, hi, I'm Eddie, this age, I live here, this is what I do. I just want to say thanks. Thanks for my life, thanks for everything I have, and give that offering. And see how you feel. Maybe you won't feel any different, but then go and do it again the next week. And then maybe do it again, and you'll be surprised quite pleasantly, I think, how much more alive the world seems by making that step and offering something. And that it's what, if you do a course with me or anything, or healing, I get them to do it before the healing. That's really the basis for shamanism as well, which is just saying thanks, praising life. And that's worked wonders for my own mental health and physical health, because it seems to take all tension away. Becoming in gratitude is something that's just bigger than us. So I'd say go and do that. And if you do it, let me know. And let me know if you feel different.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
definitely doing it. I think that's a great tip that everyone can go away and try. And with that, on that note, Eddie, what's the best way for people to kind of find you and contact you?
Instagram is probably the best way. It's at Eddy Elsey, just EDDYELSEY. Or my website, streetspirituality.com. So between them, get in touch.
Well, I'll add those to sort of the show notes and things like this, so people will be able to kind of find them that way as well.
Okay.
But Eddie, thank you so much. I think this has been an amazing conversation. I think there's been really powerful and really helpful for a lot of the people that will listen to it, because I think although you're coming at it from quite a unique perspective, I think everything you've said is just so applicable to certainly my clients and the customers at Health Path. So I really think it will be a valuable resource for everyone. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for inviting me.
No, it's my pleasure.